So, welcome everyone who's watching, near or far. This is the second Hangout webinar of MUS 654, which is an open music course. The live version of that is based at the University of Chichester in England, and today we have one of our students, Pete, and we also have Duane with us from Hawaii, who was featured in the content. So you may have listened to Duane's explanation on YouTube of what's the difference between a riff and a melody. And this week was all about what makes a melody. So before we start talking about what went on in the week and that topic, let's have Pete and Duane introduce themselves. Duane.
Okay, so hi everybody, my name is Duane. I'm a violinist based out in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I teach classical and jazz violin at Punahou School. Our claim to fame is that we're the elementary school and high school where Barack Obama, our president, went to school. So that's our claim to fame out here in Hawaii.
That's great. Thank you. And Pete?
Hi, I'm Pete. I'm a guitarist at the University of Chichester. I'm Laura's student and very interested in all this kind of online collaboration stuff and open source learning and things. So, and obviously what makes melody. So, yeah, hello. So
the great thing, last year I asked Duane, would you explain to us, make a video, because Duane, he teaches classical and jazz. Not many people do that, and especially not many violinists do that. And we used to be in a quartet together a long time ago when we were both at Northwestern University as students. And so to have insight from somebody who has learned in different ways and is very skilled as a teacher is a real privilege. So the first question I have for you, Duane, is when you made that video, how did you do it? Because it looks so amazing. You just shuffled up some flashcards and made a melody. Did you practice that melody a lot beforehand?
Oh no, that one's interesting. My brother and I, Dan, we used to do a children's show, and that was one of our exercises that we did it for a couple of years. So that exercise I had a lot of practice doing, where we go to schools and we'd have bigger versions of the flashcards. So that kind of thing, yeah, I had been doing for a while. Yeah.
Because it's really good, and the way that it was explained was really good. So
yeah,
go on.
Because I think one of the more profound things when I was in graduate school, my violin professor, that from some very few simple components, a lot of complexity can be spun out of it. And so that exercise is a good example of that. There's just a few simple ideas, but then if you take it to its furthest generation, a lot of very complicated things can spin out of something very simple. Yeah.
It's amazing how that happens with something that seems so easy. One of the tasks I set for this week was to imitate some bird song, and just a few seconds can be really, really tricky. And it's like you say, something that sounds simple, it's really not sometimes. So when you started imitating other people and copying different solos from people, how did you start that?
Well, I think for me, the improvising, it was more of a trial by fire kind of thing. So just after an orchestra rehearsal one day, I was eating dinner at a restaurant where they were having jazz music, and just I had my violin with me because it was after an orchestra rehearsal. And as I was leaving, the jazz singer called from the stage, it's like, "You can't leave here without singing a song, playing a song with us, you know." And I was like, and that was my first attempt at improvising, and that one was just kind of dive in and just try to mix up notes, and then from there it started evolved just from listening a lot to the music of players like Stefan Grappelli, and just try to, it's like when you listen to a language for the first time, it all sounds like mumbo jumbo, and then after you listen to it for a couple weeks, you start to be able to discern words, and then after you can discern words, you can hear where sentences go, and it's very much like learning a language, actually.
Do you think it takes practice to get more brave at doing it? Because I know one thing that I really admire with the way you play and learn and teach is that you post millions of things on YouTube of, and not just violin. You'll play a tune on the accordion or on the mandolin or on the guitar, and you post these tunes, and it's really brave, I think, because I know certainly some of the students that I've been working with, they might be doing these things, but it's a little bit daunting to share the learning process in a sort of public way. How did you get to the point where you're comfortable doing that?
Well, for that one, I'm inspired mostly by this past couple of years. I've had a lot of adult students who are like, they're maybe in their 40s or 50s, and they're picking up a violin for the first time. And you know, once you're an expert on your own instrument, it's very easy to forget that feeling when you're picking up something that you've never learned before and trying to learn as a beginner. So just so I could get in their mindset, I started picking up all these instruments. Yeah. And so to inspire them, I just posted myself as a beginner on each one of these instruments. And the good thing is I'm sort of very obsessive, so I practice a lot, so I don't remain a beginner on the instruments very long. So then I got to pick up another one, so I can remember that feeling over and over of always being a beginner. Yeah.
That's excellent. Pete, what do you think about that? From a sort of, you're still studying perspective. You have to unmute your mic.
There you go. I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do, to be honest, to just keep picking up different instruments, because one is challenging enough for me. I like the idea of making yourself like a beginner, though, because we did that in second year with the violin. I picked up the violin just to try and put yourselves back into the shoes of a beginner, because a lot of the people that we study with would be like classical violinists or something, and they might have played since they were what, like 2 or 3 years old, and now they're like approaching 20, so they've just completely don't even remember what it was like to learn. So I think that's a great thing, to be consciously sort of aware of that and physically make yourself be in the beginner's shoes. I think that helps when, like you said, when you're trying to teach. That's an invaluable asset, really, because people too often don't actually think of the learner. They think like, this is how you play and you have to do it like this, rather than thinking that everybody learns from a different sort of point of view, I guess.
What sort of impact has it had on your students, Duane?
Actually, now a lot of my students are now trying to pick up multiple instruments. I noticed that the secretary at the registrar, that all of a sudden my students are signing up for flute and violin and guitar and ukulele like me. So I think it's sort of infectious, this kind of a thing. Yeah. And the interesting thing too is, as I've noticed, as the more and more I explore the jazz idiom, is that honestly, it's not very useful to think about jazz from the perspective of a violinist, because violinists tend to think of only the melody and the notes that go one after the other. And actually, as a jazz musician, that's not very useful. The more useful thing is to think more in terms of the harmonic structure and the chords. So after about 4 years of playing jazz, I hit a wall, and I said I have to think more. I was playing with a lot of guitarists at the time, and you know, even like a beginning guitarist after 2 weeks probably knows more functional music theory than a violinist. I mean, they can play 1-4-5-1 and know what that means, and more than just an theoretical from a point of view. So then my first main secondary instrument was guitar, just to think like a guitarist, how they move from one chord to the next, and not just on a piece of paper, but they can feel and understand the function of the harmony. And you know, and they're like, minor chord has 3 notes, but then they have like other color tones that guitarists just know to add the 9th or the 13th or the 12th or the 2nd. Those are things that violinists would never think. Well, we never thought about the root or the third, or we just play the notes one after the other. I mean, so that's the value of learning, seeing the music from all the different points of view, actually, because everybody has a different role in the music making. And if you can play that role, it influences when you come back to the violin. You play much differently now that you can understand that role from a first-person perspective. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to ask you to say a bit more on that, how learning one instrument gives you the perspective of another. But I'm going to ask, if you slump down like 1.5 inches, then we'll be able to see the rest of your face. We can see the bottom half of your face. Hey, that's better. Then we can see all of you. Brilliant.
Okay.
So, because it was that the impact of other instruments is, yeah, I'm curious about that. So that's really, because I mean, as a cello player, we think in a linear fashion, but how does the harmony change the way you think about the melody on your main instrument? What do you get from the other instruments?
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing about because until I started playing guitar and other instruments, is that actually the foundation, as a person who plays the melody, actually the music in jazz isn't about the melody. Actually, the foundation of it comes from the groove and the harmony. So, like the first thing you got to learn how to do as a jazz musician is actually not play the melody, but know how to realize the harmonic structure of the music. I actually have my guitar here. So let's see here. Well, so yeah, as I have my cool guitar here. So so if you're a guitar player to do something like this on a jazz thing, yeah, that's pretty easy to do, right? Because when you see guitars, what they do, they strum the rhythm with the right hand and realize the harmony in the left hand, right? So, but as a violinist, yeah, the big revolution here in the United States is how to achieve that on the fiddle itself. And people have all kind of ways. I know one of my own students, Anna Derrick, she discovered this on her own, and I discovered a lot of other students that they're just strumming violins like ukuleles and guitars. So they're doing this like yeah. And then there's a whole another group of musicians that are trying to do more of this percussive. I don't know, in England, are people doing the chop technique yet?
A bit.
The chop bow.
But yeah, a bit.
Yeah. So that one is they take the bow and then they make this percussive, and then if you're sort of more adventurous, you can do there's a down scratch and then there's an up scratch and then you got two versions of the beat and you go on. And if you add eighth on, and then so that's the right hand, like how a guitarist would pick the string, and then if you finger chords with this side, So already, now you've transferred the role of the guitar to the violin now, and so you actually can understand the harmony not just from the outside but from the inside, and then you actually know the notes in the chord. So A minor, I was just strumming A minor, right? And then your improvisation is probably based on those same. Yeah, so then that once you have that all internalized, the rest spins out of that foundation of the music. Yeah.
That's great. What do you think about that, Pete, as a guitarist?
I think that's a really, really useful tool actually to be able to do that kind of to transfer the skills across instruments. It reminds me of when I was transposing Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, transposing the sax line, and it made me realize just how differently instruments approach melodies. On the guitar, like especially if you're like a rock guitarist like myself, you've got a foundation in say like rock or blues. A lot of the stuff that you do will sort of revolve around like pentatonic scales or something like that. And I always tend to think of this scale goes here and this scale goes there, and you're very thinking within boxes and stuff. Whereas like you were saying, Duane, about the different instruments approaching things. When I transferred the sax line onto guitar, I realized that they were much more free at approaching the melody in the way that they'd kind of dance around the chords. I would just kind of play around one scale, whereas the saxophones would be, I don't know, they just seem to do everything much sort of more linearly and with a lot more kind of fluidity than guitar, than how I would approach something on a guitar. And I found it really interesting just because they wouldn't just stick to a scale. There'd be chromatic notes in there, and there'd be lots of different I don't know, just lots of different ways of approaching something that I hadn't previously noticed on guitar, and to me it was quite sort of eye-opening to do that. So I guess that's a similar sort of thing that you've described that I sort of realized on the guitar.
Yeah, the guitar is a fascinating instrument for me. I don't. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I know you'd think that they look very similar. Like there's strings, there's a bridge, and there's a body. But when we play, everybody plays just the same way. Like when we have the notes, they go one by one, and then the bow goes this way. I notice guitar players, they think about the instrument in a way they don't think about. There's three ways you think about it. Like as a beginner, they have these finger shapes. Like you can play theoretical chords, but it's sort of like on an Apple Mac. You can get around on the computer, but you don't have to understand the deep programming code or complexity. You can just do things. And so they have these finger shapes. Like yeah, so every guitar player knows that that's the shape of the E major chord, and they may or may not know what the notes in the E major chord are. And then they have this other shape where you can slide it around. The thing that was a shock to me as learning guitar play, so I get the beginning guitar method book, and already from the get-go, you're playing more than one note at the same time. I mean, on a violin or a cello, the idea of doing double stops you wouldn't do until 6 or 7 years into the thing. And I remember, so then I got in, so that was already fascinating. So I get this 101 on rock and roll, and already we were playing 4 notes at the same time. Okay, this is terrible. I gotta wrap my brain around. Then I went into one of these old classical methods for classical guitar, and they're doing stuff that we wouldn't do until we were in graduate school. They're running the bass line and the harmony and the melody all at the same time, and it's like the level 1 classical guitar. So this made me rethink about, we teach people the violin in a way that makes it seem harder later. This idea that you could put down more than one finger at the same time and play them is something like people like guitar players do from day one, but yet we as orchestral string players it's probably not a good idea even as a profession to play double stops in an orchestra gig, because the probability you'll play it in tune is pretty low. So so these kind of things, it's made me rethink the whole pedagogy even of the instrument, because other people think in a way that's more valuable sometimes. Yeah,
I think that's hugely important. And sometimes within a discipline, you get a teacher who has, like you're thinking in a different way. And I remember my teacher, Hans Jensen, wrote a thumb position book because he thought there was no reason why you should wait for students to learn the higher up notes, the thumb position, and until later. And it may be the same thing with double stopping, or there may be different things that come about from learning other instruments. Have you found anything from your flute playing? Because like you said, the strings, the guitar, and the ukulele, and the mandolin, and the violin all have some surface similarities. But an instrument that you use your breath to produce is sort of inherently different. How is it with that?
Yeah, well, my latest one, it's not really the one that you blow into, but my latest fetish is the accordion. So the squeeze box thing. And I find myself when I'm practicing chording that I start to hyperventilate, because when I'm pulling the thing out, I start to do the sympathetic breathing with the bellows of the thing, and so then you sort of have to plan out. But the thing is, the bellows can go for quite a long time. You can go almost 16 beats if you pace it out. But then if you try to sync your breathing with it, all of a sudden the idea of the phrasing and stuff, you have to work it out, because you're pulling this thing and then squeezing it, but then your breathing can't breathe that long, so it's a whole other element. Yeah.
So when do you breathe?
Well, that one, I just breathe when it's sort of like when you do the bowl. That's what I've noticed. That, like, when you would turn around the bowl is when you would turn around the direction on the squeeze box thing. Yeah. But that was another interesting thing, because I decided for the accordion, I don't have it with me, it's in my office, but I got the one because I wanted to challenge myself. There's an accordion that has buttons on the left-hand side and the one that looks like a piano on the right-hand side. So I didn't get one of those. I got one of the French ones, the chromatic button accordion. It looks like a typewriter, and it's just rows of circles that are all half steps apart from each other, and then there's like duplicate fingerings and stuff like that. I'll make another video and post it on YouTube. Yeah, because I guess in Russia they had a different arrangement of the keyboard that's faster. If you can wrap your brain around it, you can run around faster. But yeah, so that's another thing. Just the idea that because it's so standardized even in teaching music theory to use the piano keyboard, but then to have this keyboard instrument that doesn't look like a piano keyboard, it's actually more efficient to finger on that thing because the piano keyboard it's basically the wrap around the C major scale, with the sharps and flats. This thing is more like a guitar neck. Like there's one fingering for a major chord, and you can move it around all the different keys with the same shape. So you only need to learn one major scale and you can move it around. Versus on the piano keyboard, every scale has a different fingering. So this other one is actually more efficient, but nobody uses it because it just looks weird. I'll take a picture and post it. Yeah.
That's excellent. Sounds like Galamian scales, except a bit more complicated. So I have a request. This is a public challenge for you. Can you give us, not now, but can you take a tune, and it can be a 4-bar tune, 8-bar tune, short tune, and play it on your various different instruments? The same tune.
The same tune. Okay, let's see. We can try it. Okay.
Oh, you don't have to do it now.
Okay, later. Okay, I'll post that on YouTube.
That's a good one. Excellent. Yeah, I have a lot to learn from you and posting things on YouTube. I did my students' homework task of playing a different, something from a different instrument, and I tried to play a guitar solo on my cello. And I must say, and it's worth saying this publicly, I was really nervous to push, like, actually I'm going to put that online, but you know what, the world didn't collapse because I posted a something. I think that's an important thing to realize, because actually the sharing and the seeing and the talking between instruments is so valuable that I think it's worth taking a risk. Obviously, you don't want to play something that's really bad, but having a window into what other people do is really useful.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the process of posting. I think I have over 60 videos on YouTube, and I still get deathly nervous when to do a 3-minute video takes about 3 hours of redoing over and over until there's one that's extendable. So, but the exercise of it's because then you can see yourself. It's very easy to fool yourself when you're practicing that it sounds okay until you put yourself on this, that other people are going to see it and you can see. Actually, in one of my classes, I teach a jazz improv class, and after every class, we make a video that I'm going to post so that the kids.
Yeah, I've seen your groups. They're really good.
They're okay. The kids there, they put up with me and my crazy.
But it's a fantastic practice because it's another way of performing, and you get in that position where you feel you're on the spot, even though there might not be a physical audience in front of you.
Yeah, and this next generation of kids coming up too, they don't have the same phobias about posting videos of themselves that we do. So for them, it's much easier. Yeah. Like they're the first ones to whip out their iPhones when it's time to do time to do it. They're all for it. So, yeah.
That's good. Pete, do you have anything you want to? I know you've muted your mic, but you can feel free to jump in.
Yeah. I think the thing that bothers me about online is that it's like so kind of permanent. You can't, when it's out there, you can't really retract it, and that's I think what's the scary thing is. It's like if you go to a gig and you make a mistake, it's kind of like, oh well, it's gone now. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if you're posting something online, you almost have to have it perfect, because otherwise everyone's going to be able to rewind and constantly watch you make that mistake. So and I think as musicians, obviously, mistakes are very much stigmatized, even though that's how we learn things. So that can be a problem, and obviously a lot of the people I know, including myself, suffer from a lot of performance anxiety and nerves and things like that. So, like you said, it still feels like a performance, even though there isn't a physical audience there, because you're like, anybody can be watching me at any time, anywhere. For as long as they want, which is almost more scary. So it has its pros and cons, I think, but it is a very, very useful tool to be able to do like things that Duane does and just put things online. I need to get better at it.
But that's interesting. I noticed that like classical musicians tend to have more performance anxiety than people in other genres, because the focus is so much on the concert hall and people bought a ticket and they're expecting some certain level of competency. From hanging out with jazz musicians, and even more so with like bluegrass country fiddle guys and folk fiddlers, the focus of other people's music making isn't the concert. It's more about just jamming with your friends in a social setting. So I know I've been to a whole bunch of gypsy jazz concerts where the actual concert, everybody bought a ticket, but nobody actually goes inside and watch the concert. They just hang out in the parking lot and jam, and they'll maybe miss most of the concert. and then when the concert is over, the headliners who were on the stage in the empty concert hall will come out and jam with everybody in the parking lot. So then the focus isn't about like this perfection. It's just about sharing music with other people. I think for gypsy jazz, that's the most infectious thing about it, is that it's not about the performance. Yeah, because I've been to like dozens of it, and nobody goes inside the concert hall to listen. They just hang out outside. That's where all the action is. So that's been very liberating with posting videos and even my own performing, because it puts the emphasis not on perfection on a stage and under the microscope. It's just more of a community sharing thing. That's something we as classical musicians could really get more of in our culture, that other genres have really embraced.
Do you think there's a metaphor there for what makes a melody, in not that there isn't a beautiful single note melody that could be traced and analyzed in a classical or romantic music history sort of sense, but when you go to these gypsy jazz things, if you're thinking in harmonic things, in working with other people, do you think there's a communal sense of melody as creating a musical statement and the direction of something? Do you think that we can learn something from that when thinking about melodies?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about melodies, it has a lot of parallels to the Suzuki method, which is, and I think it was unintended by Dr. Suzuki when he designed like the very controversial, Suzuki method for string teaching. His idea, the reason why all the kids in the Suzuki method all the same repertoire was his idea that since if everybody knows the same repertoire, we can all get together and play the same songs together. And that's, versus in traditional classical teaching, you choose the song that the kid needs to learn to gain the next level of skill, and that may or may not be the same skill that Johnny or Mary is learning in their lesson. But I know in the Suzuki method, that's a huge part of it, that everybody has a common repertoire. So, and if you're a Suzuki violin student, you could go to do a Suzuki violin workshop in England or in Hawaii or in New York City, and everybody has a common repertoire that they can share and play together. And in the gypsy jazz and folk zone, everybody knows the same repertoire. So all of their improvising is based on the vocabulary from all the songs of the common repertoire, which is why people can just go and jam together spontaneously, because it's all a shared knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's I'd love to see more of that. If we should have like a musician's anthem, no, but something even across styles, but across instruments, that we could share with each other, because there's so many things that, like you said, violinists think like violinists, and they think differently to a guitar player or a tuba player or a singer, and I think there's an awful lot that we can learn from that communal, taking part in it together.
Yeah, and it's interesting in these other genres too, because that's the other thing about classical pedagogy I've noticed compared to other genres, is that everybody specializes at a very young age at one instrument. But you go to these other places, everybody plays everything. Like they'll be playing the violin, and then the guitar player is tired and wants to get a drink at the bar, and so the fiddle player just put down the violin, pick up the guitar, and keep going. And then the bass player gets tired, and so the violinist comes back from the bar with his beer and then grabs the bass. And so, in other genres of music, people don't specialize on instruments. They kind of know the music and how the songs go, and they can realize whatever needs on all the different instruments. It's a different mindset in other genres.
Oh look, we've just had a tweet. Somebody has said that they don't agree. They're a popular musician and they also have performance anxiety. So maybe sometimes you get a perception of people and there are issues out there as well. So that's just from the my mother would call it the peanut gallery.
Right.
The people watching, people contributing. Everybody's welcome. But yeah, I mean, playing another instrument, it can be really daunting. But I don't know why we don't necessarily do it. I think we have there's some, well, in some specialisms there's a pressure to be a certain level, and I don't know.
Yeah, because I was doing some research for pedagogy research too. Back in the 1800s, before you picked up an instrument, people would focus more on solfege and music theory, and then they'd give you the instrument of your choice. I think these days, I don't know, just because the way it's taught, most people start off with the instrument because it's more fun, and they learn the theory later. And that sort of, then your knowledge of music is more focused on the instrument than on the music itself. Yeah. So I don't know how that came about, but that's sort of the trend.
I wonder if it's changing though, because people are getting much more aware and connected like this, so that you can learn. I can learn from Pete, the guitarist, who can learn from you, the jazz violinist, who can we can learn from the person who tweeted in, and you know. So I wonder if there's going to be another shift.
Well, I notice even with my own students, because I have a whole bunch of private students, that they think about music differently than we do, just because they've heard a lot more stuff. When we were kids, we actually had to spend $15 on a CD, and it was very expensive to listen to music. So the amount of different genres that we listened to was narrow because we had to pay money for it. But I mean, anybody who's 13 years old and younger, they've heard a wide variety of stuff that you wouldn't think they would listen to. Like so I'm teaching this jazz improv class, and then I said, what funk song do you want to do next? And some kid had memorized all these Michael Jackson tunes, the lyrics, the tone, the bass line, the melody. I mean, some kid who's 12 years old has memorized the complete Michael Jackson thing, and and some other kid who's only 12 knows Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, all this pop stuff that was like totally not in their age bracket, but they're listening because they can see it free on YouTube, and that music is still was made at a high level back then, so the kids can appreciate it. So they've heard a lot more stuff than we have actually. So for them, the learning curve is much quicker. Yeah.
That's brilliant. So the moral of the story is we better go listen to some music. And and there's a plug for Duane because he's done an absolutely fantastic Billie Jean violin cover with the loop pedal, which is quite cool. So maybe we can try to emulate that one. And we've got to wrap it up because our time is up. And we'll hear more from Duane later in the course. There's an interview with him. And thank you so much for joining us. So if anybody out there watches this and has questions, you can tweet them with the hashtag MUS654, and we'll find them and answer them. And if any of you have looked at the week 2 tasks, feel free to do them. Play a melody on a new instrument, copy some birdsong, have a look through the different things, and any questions, I'm always happy to hear. So from all of us, signing off.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.